WADR. Promoting dialogue.
Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to NewsLink. Here are the top stories. Senegalese President Sall plans to reshuffle cabinet ahead of February polls. U.S. military resumes drone flights and manned counter-terrorism missions out of Niger bases. The Gambian police apprehend suspect in fatal shooting of 3 officers across Senegal's Casamance region. And reactions trail African Union's plan to launch an independent credit rating agency aiming to bolster the continent's access to capital.
The implication of such rating, if indeed is biased, will be that it will deny financing to the African government.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Imo Edit with NewsLink.
Many thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to our listeners in Ghana, the Gambia and in Liberia. But let's begin in Senegal, where the presidency has announced an imminent cabinet reshuffle by the end of the week. This is according to an announcement made on Wednesday at the end of the Council of Ministers meeting. The head of state intends to change the figure of his government before his departure for the United States, scheduled for next Sunday. However, no details on the changes that have been made. Several observers, however, believe that appointments are expected in the ministries of sports and livestock, cumulatively occupied by Prime Minister Amadou Ba, candidate of the presidential camp in the February 2024 elections. An appointment is also expected at the Ministry of Agriculture, previously held by Ali Nguyen Njai. The latter, a presidential candidate, resigned from his post following the appointment of Amadou Ba as candidate of the Benno Bokk Yakaar coalition. Now, a French official detained in Niger last week has been released. The French government said on Thursday there were heightened tensions between France and Niger, where military officers deposed an elected president last month and ordered French officials to leave. Tawfiq Abdul Nasser has the details.
France's foreign ministry said in a statement that Stéphane Julien, counselor for French citizens abroad, was released Wednesday, 5 days after he was arrested. The French ministry didn't provide details about the release or about the reasons for his arrest. The French government had called for his freedom. Military officers in Niger overthrew and detained elected President Mohamed Bazoum in July and last month ordered the French ambassador to leave the country. France, Niger's former colonial ruler, has refused to heed the order, saying that the junta isn't the country's legitimate authority. French ambassador Sylvain It was asked to leave Niger in a letter from the Nigerian Foreign Ministry that accused him of ignoring an invitation for a meeting with the ministry. The letter also cited actions of the French government contrary to the interest of Niger. Nearly 1,500 French troops are based in Niger to help local forces fight Islamic extremists. However, the military cooperation has been suspended since the coup, whose leaders claimed that Bazoum's government wasn't doing enough to protect the country from the insurgency. The junta is now under sanctions by Western and regional African powers.
Tawfiq Abdul Nasser filed that report. In the meantime, the U.S. military has resumed flying drones and manned aircraft out of air bases in Niger more than a month after a coup temporarily halted all these activities there, the head of the U.S. Air Forces for Europe and Africa said on Wednesday. Since the July coup, the 1,100 U.S. forces deployed in the country have been confined inside their military bases. Last week, the Pentagon said some military personnel and assets had been moved from the airbase near Niamey, which is the capital of Niger, to another in Agadez. Niamey is about 920 kilometers away from Agadez. Speaking with newsman General James Hector, the top Air Force commander for Europe and Africa, said in a recent week some of those intelligence and surveillance missions have been able to resume due to U.S. negotiations with the junta. Let's head to the Gambia, where the police have officially announced the arrest of the suspect responsible for the shooting that claimed the lives of 3 police officers on Tuesday. The alleged perpetrator was apprehended during an operation carried out in the Senegalese region of Casamance on Wednesday afternoon. These developments followed President Adama Barrow's decisive action, announcing a bounty of $1 million on the shooter's head. Our Banjul correspondent, Sankule Janko, has more in this report.
The Office of the Inspector General of the Gambia Police has officially confirmed the successful arrest of Mr. Usainu Bojang from Brufut Bojankunda. His apprehension is linked to the recent shooting at the Sugdo traffic light junction, a tragic incident that led to the loss of 2 police officers' lives and left another in critical condition. The police reported that the operation to capture the suspect was carried out with precision, resulting in his arrest in Jululung, Casamance, Senegal. As of the time of this report, the police have not been able to determine the motive behind the shooting. Currently, the suspect is in police custody and an ongoing investigation seeks to uncover the reasons behind the attack on the police officers, as stated in an official police statement. Bojan's arrest occurred shortly after President Barrow announced a reward of $1 million, equivalent to over $14,000, for any information leading to his apprehension. The president described the incident as an act of terrorism and took a strong stance against such acts, emphasizing that they would not be tolerated in the country. This incident marks the first of its kind in the Gambia. The Gambia Police Force has expressed its commitment to sharing relevant information from the investigation that is suitable for public knowledge and has called for the public's cooperation on this matter. For NEWSLINK on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankole Jenko reporting from Banjul.
And in Liberia, President George Weah has refuted allegations made by the primary opposition party, the Unity Party, which has accused his government of increasing drug import into the country instead of offering effective solutions to address the socio-economic challenges that Liberia and its citizens are grappling with. These claims from the Unity Party have emerged following the recent report of a drug seizure at the Roberts International Airport. WDL's Monrovia correspondent Darlington Popper has more on the story.
The former ruling United Party's stance was articulated by a senatorial candidate for Masarauda County, Westmont Bay. He asserted during a press conference held in Monrovia on Wednesday that since the inception of the George Weah-led administration, over $200 million worth of dangerous drugs have been brought into the country without anyone being held accountable.
Since Weah came to power, he and a few friends have brought into this country more than $200 worth of cocaine and other harmful substances. So you can imagine the problem we are talking about. It's about time to wake up to the great reality of these people destroying our country. They send their children abroad to benefit from decent life abroad, preparing them, and then they make you drunk. They make your children to become useless by bringing substances into the country.
However, in a contrasting response, President George Weah vehemently refuted these claims while campaigning in central Liberia on Wednesday. He accused the Unity Party of turning Liberia into a nation associated with drug trafficking during their 12-year governance, which concluded in 2017.
They will kind of complicate things. They came to you, they say, George Weah allowed drugs to come in the country. Do I do drugs? No, I don't do drugs. I'm a sportsman, I don't do drugs. Now, 71 years ago, there were no drugs in Liberia. If you check our record, this government, in 5 years, every day they're arresting those that bring drugs and alcohol. What we're doing that they didn't do, when we get the drugs, we arrest those people and burn it right away. What they did, when they have it, they keep it. We are on record, so don't let them lie to you.
In a related development, the Liberian National Police announced the apprehension of Samuel Freeman, the director of security at the Roberts International Airport. He was detained due to his alleged involvement in the recent importation of illicit drugs. For NEWSLINK on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Popper in Monrovia.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. NEWSLINK continues.
We cross over now to Mali, where the Prime Minister Shigel Kokala Maiga has spoken for the first time since the increase in attacks by ex-rebels in the northern region of the country. Recall the latest of these was a retaliation by the Malian army in the wake of the attack on the Burem camp, which left around 50 ex-rebels and a dozen of FAMA soldiers dead. Despite the growing tension on the ground, the population have expressed worries. However, the Prime Minister is assuring that transitional authorities have no intention of ceding an iota of the territory to the ex-rebels.
Our priority is the war on terrorism. After 30 years, this canker has spread to our country and to other countries because there were complicities where people thought that money and palaver would solve the problem. But there are people who live off the crisis. They don't want it to end. We said we had to put an end to it, and we made a commitment to equip the army. We recently took over the bear camp, but so far some people are swearing that we will regret it, that we won't take the other camps, Tessalit, Aguelok, Kidal, and Menaka. We will take them by God's grace. It will not go on like this. Our country is not going to give in. We are going to take the bases in Tessalit, Aguelok, Kidal, and Menaka. Our army needs to be supported, to be understood.
Notre armée a besoin d'être soutenue, d'être comprise.
Malian Prime Minister Senegal Kokala Maiga speaking there. Well, in Ghana, President Nana Akufo-Addo has expressed his readiness to become the inaugural recipient of the annual investment report on his country. This report, authored by the global research and advisory company Oxford Business Group (OBG), is scheduled for publication this year. During a meeting with Romana Tata, OBG's country director for Ghana, President Akufo-Addo affirmed his commitment to support OBG's forthcoming publication titled Ghana 2023. A pledge to facilitate high-level engagements between the OBG team and key leaders of state-owned enterprises in Ghana, aiming to conduct comprehensive research into the nation's vital economic sectors. In a related development, Chelsea Bonny, the United Nations resident coordinator in Ghana, has recognized Ghana's substantial contributions to the pursuit of sustainability.
This is why when I spoke, I talked about it in terms of the challenge. And when you read the challenge of this, you can often end up feeling just a sense of doom and gloom. But of course, Ghana is a good example that in spite of the difficulties, there is progress. Ghana has bounced back from COVID-19, bounced back or is bouncing back from a big macro fiscal crisis, and growth figures are headed in the right direction. I think the purpose of this moment, the SDG moment that we are reflecting on, is halfway through what are the most important actions that must be taken if we are to accelerate and catalyze action so that we overcome some of those barriers. And I think the importance of the private sector in that needs to be amplified much more than it is, and that is what we're trying to do through partnerships with Impact Invest in Ghana, with Andy and a raft of others who already are working on this particular agenda to bring it into the mainstream of the Sustainable Development Goals.
We'll cross over now to Nigeria, where in response to the persistent armed attacks, particularly targeting religious communities in the northwestern region, the Kaduna State Police Command met with religious leaders representing the 23 local government areas within the state. According to the Commissioner of Police, this is to collaboratively devise proactive strategies aimed at putting an end to these tragic killings. Representatives of the Christian Association of Nigeria, CAN, at the meeting said 23 pastors were killed in 4 years, while about 200 churches were shut down in the same period due to the attacks. WDL's Usman Omar in Abuja has more in this report.
The police commissioner convened a meeting with Christian leaders to seek their assistance in addressing security challenges within Kaduna State. Hayab, who warmly embraced this initiative, assured the commissioner of the Christian leaders' unwavering support in the pursuit of peace and stability in Kaduna State. He expressed optimism that this endeavor would bring about positive changes in the state's security landscape.
That over 200 churches in Kaduna have been shut down. The Baptists know that they have over 150 of their churches shut down, from Benue to Chukun and Kejim.
Prior to this gathering, Musa addressed an assembly of more than 450 pastors hailing from different parts of Kaduna. He emphasized that the purpose of the meeting was to secure the cooperation of the clergy and incorporate their insights into ongoing efforts aimed at fostering peace in the state. Musa stressed that security concerns should be collective responsibility, underscoring religious leaders' pivotal role in ensuring a harmonious society.
What I'm doing here is being proactive. I'm engaging with you, hearing from you, telling you my own actions, and even appealing to you
Kaduna State, situated in northern Nigeria, has been marred by loss of lives, economic disruptions, and property damage in recent years due to various security challenges, including religious and communal conflicts, banditry, and kidnappings for ransom. For NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
You're listening to NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, and on our partner stations across the Sahel region. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Senegalese President Sall plans to reshuffle cabinet ahead of February polls. U.S. military resumes drone flight and manned counterterrorism missions out of Niger bases. The Gambian police apprehend suspect in fatal shooting of 3 officers across Senegal's Casamance region. And still ahead, reactions trail the African Union's plans to launch an independent credit rating agency aiming to bolster the continent's access to capital. This is on our guest interview segment, and we also have sports news. Please stay with us.
WADR.
We're streaming live on WADR.com, YouTube, and Facebook. The African Union is set to inaugurate a new African credit rating agency in the upcoming year to tackle the organization's apprehensions regarding the perceived unfairness of ratings assigned to African nations. Meshek Mutize, who serves as the lead expert for country support on rating agencies within the African Union, affirmed that the agency would establish its own evaluation of lending risk associated with African countries with its operations based on the continent. Mutize further emphasized that the agency's mandate would encompass providing valuable context for investors, aiding them in their decisions to invest in African bonds or extend private loans to these countries. Abdullah Hassan reports.
The African Union, AU, and leaders of member countries spanning from Ghana to Senegal to Zambia have raised concerns alleging that the big 3 rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P Global Ratings, are not providing fair assessments of lending risks to African countries. They argue that these agencies tend to be quicker in downgrading African nations during crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. All 3 ratings agencies have denied any bias, asserting that their rating methodology remains consistent across different continents. Ravi Bhatia, S&P's lead analyst for sovereign ratings, recently informed Reuters that the agency consistently applies the same criteria worldwide. A spokesperson from Fitch Ratings also emphasized that all sovereign rating decisions rely on globally consistent and publicly available criteria, and they transparently identify all rating factors. Credit ratings serve the purpose of assessing a borrower's risk of default and influencing the terms at which lenders, among others, provide loans. Over a dozen African countries have international bonds outstanding. In an April study conducted by the United Nations Development Programme UNDP, it was suggested that African countries could potentially save up to $74.5 billion if credit ratings were based on less subjective assessments.
Abdullah Hassan filed that report. In West and Central Africa, the number of school closures over the past 4 years due to insecurity has almost doubled, reaching more than 13,200 closed schools in 8 countries of the region. A joint report authored by the Norwegian Refugee Council NRC, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees UNHCR, and the United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF revealed that the education of approximately 2.5 million children is in immediate jeopardy. As Ogubierika reports, the authors of the report are urgently calling upon governments, armed forces, conflicting parties, and the international community to take concerted action in order to halt the alarming trend of attacks and threats against schools, students, and educators in the region.
According to the report, in West and Central Africa, only 3.9% of funding appeals for education had been met by the beginning of September. By way of comparison, 30.5% of calls for funds were met for the entire humanitarian sector in the region in September. Despite the explosion in needs, education is all too often neglected. The situation in the Central Sahel, it says, is particularly acute, adding that the number of schools closed increased nearly 6-fold between 2019 and 2023, from 1,700 to almost 9,000. Burkina Faso alone accounts for half of the school closures recorded in Central and West Africa, with more than 6,100 schools closed as of July 2023. In some cases, schools are the target of direct attacks by non-state armed groups. 147 incidents were reported between January and August 2023 across the region. In other cases, schools are deserted or abandoned following forced population displacement, the findings added. Faced with conflict, families and teachers flee. It also noted that schooling is abruptly interrupted, not only for displaced children, but also for children from host communities whose schools are overcrowded. Xavier Crouch, Deputy Director of UNHCR Regional Bureau for West and Central Africa, said in a region where the protection of civilians and their access to basic services is increasingly threatened by insecurity and conflict, there is a collective duty to act to ensure that schools remain safe spaces for all forcibly displaced children and youth and those from host communities.
Ogeberika reporting there.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
All right, now let's take you back to the report where the African Union AU believes international credit rating agencies have been giving erroneous ratings to African countries. The AU plans to launch its own sovereign credit rating agency next year as an alternative to the big three international rating agencies, which it believes unfairly rank countries on the continent. Moody's, Fitch and S&P make significant errors in their ratings, yet continue to influence global financing decisions and the flow of capital, according to a report for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA. The report says that Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo criticized agencies for exacerbating fiscal challenges in developing countries with unwarranted rating downgrades that shut governments out of the capital market. Well, could this be what informed the AU of this decision? Jide Akintunde is the publisher of Financial Nigeria.
I think that the AU, rightly or wrongly, feels that the international rating agencies, especially the big three, have been unfair in their rating assessments of African sovereigns. The implication of such rating, if indeed is biased, will be that it will deny financing to the African government, or it would increase the costs of such financing, since it would factor the risk premium as a result of what the rating agencies have said.
In other words, are you saying this is a wrong move by the African Union to want to set up its own rating agencies and rate itself? Or do you think this will also help boost investors' confidence at any point?
No, I don't see how this is going to be helpful at all to the AU as well as to the African continent. First and foremost, the capital that Africa seeks to access is outside the continent, in which case, like you know, he who owns the pipe, who pays the piper, dictates the tune. And so you cannot rate yourself, and in fact expect financiers to believe that your rating is indeed unbiased. So it looks like the African Union is making a move to solve a problem by actually worsening it. Okay, so this move, I think, should be reconsidered. I would think that, first and foremost, the very claim of unfair assessment by the rating agency should actually be looked into. It is actually very likely that the local context of Africa is such that puts it at a disadvantage with this rating. I mean, that is very, very likely. And so perhaps an adaptation of the rating criteria, could be advocated for. But to outrightly now sideline the rating agencies by creating independent rating agencies by the AU for African countries, I really don't think that would inspire investors' confidence. And then the other point to make is that it is actually palpable. We can feel it, that there has been a deterioration in both governance and economic performance in Africa in the last couple of years. In terms of governance, we now know that a couple of countries are now under military rule in Africa, and this is a growing trend. On the other hand, we also see that economic woes are actually growing. Either we look at the debt levels in the continent or, in fact, the GDP growth. Yes, there's an assessment that there will be an uptick in growth this year, but it is actually growing at a rate historically below where Africa had been about 10 years ago, thereabouts.
But what other ways do you think the AU can approach this to also meet that point of bringing more investors, not really from the West, but local investors within the African Union?
The issue about access to capital by the government, it's one thing. Access to capital by the corporates, the private sector entities, including the banks and the financiers on the continent, it's another thing altogether. With regard to the governments, they have a number of options. One option is to broaden their international partnerships. So we have seen that more and more African countries are tilting eastward, where countries like China, are coming forward to say they want to increase their partnership engagements with Africa. Now, that is positive in the sense that we are not substituting the West, but we are only broadening the scope of our partnership. So the governments can explore these options. Number two, they can also look at how to generate revenues internally. A country like Nigeria has a very low debt to GDP ratio. So perhaps there is a scope there for increasing internally generated revenue.
Jide Akintoye is the publisher of Financial Nigeria. And in sport news, South Africa hooker Malcolm Marx was ruled out of the remainder of the Rugby World Cup on Thursday with what the team described as a long-term knee injury. Marx sustained the injury in a training session on Wednesday when his knee was caught in contact, the Springbok said. The team didn't immediately give any more details on the exact nature of the injury, but suggested Max was facing a long time on the sidelines. South Africa has just one other specialist hooker in the squad in Bongi Mbonambi, who was selected to captain a second-string Springboks team against Romania on Sunday. And we've come to the end of this edition of NewsLink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Many thanks for listening, and thanks to Christian Mukudi and Mustafa Sak for the technical assistance. Let's continue the conversation on X, Instagram at WDL News, and Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. I am Imo Edit. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to NewsLink via Hot 104.3 FM